Hello, everybody, and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today, I was going to discuss the birth chart of the 14th Dalai Lama and succession for the Tibetan Buddhism sect that he's a leader of. Today, as I'm recording this, is July 6th, and it happens to be his birthday, so happy birthday to His Holiness. This talk is from a Vedic astrology or Jyotish perspective, so ancient Indian astrology that's more than 5,000 years old. So let's go ahead and take a look. A few announcements and orientation. If you're new to the channel, auto dubbing is now available on this channel in 8 different languages that are listed here. All of my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are in my concepts playlist. They can all be found there. Wherever you see a double asterisk in one of my talks, that means there's a teaching video on that topic if you'd like to learn more. My channel's pretty organized, so different playlists help you find different videos on different topics. So this type of interpretation video on a public figure is in my famous people playlist, for example. There are others such as world places and historic events. And if you'd like to learn astrology by looking at more famous birth charts, I would check out my birth chart archive list 2025 video, where I list all the different famous charts of people, places, and moments in time, and the videos you can find them in. My last three newest teaching videos are Parvata and Kahala Yoga for Power, Leadership, and Wealth, then What is Mundane Astrology, and then Sagittarius Constellation or Danu Rashi. And if you're new to all this and would like to start learning Vedic astrology, or at least get a pretty good foundation to get more out of talks like this, I've listed some foundational videos at the end of the slide here, so I would start with those to get a good for all this. All right, so let's take a look at his chart. The 14th Dalai Lama. He was born July 6, 1935. It's not, I guess, at least I wasn't able to find an exact birth time for him. There were quite a few variations, so what I did here is I cast a sun rising chart for him. Okay, and he was born in gochara, Tibet. So yeah, we're dealing with a Surya Lugna or sun chart here. Yeah, so there was some indication that maybe he was born around sunrise or before sunrise. I think there was some unverified report that his mother said he was born before sunrise, and actually, in part of Tibet, sunrise was at 5:03 a.m. So maybe, maybe he was born at that time. The thing that was the reason why I wrote it down is that if he was a Gemini Lugna, and we're dealing with a Gemini Lugna here, so Gemini Lugna is a Gemini ascendant, rising sign, first house, if you're not familiar. And the first house is the top diamond in the middle. This is a North Indian style chart. And to get to the other houses, you count inclusively from the top, middle, up and to the left, or counterclockwise. And so the ascendant, rising sign, first house, or Lugna, those are all different names for the same thing. And the Lugna is important because what it does is it sets a tone for the rest of the chart in terms of both physicality and personality of someone or something. Okay, so anyway, the time frame though, if he was actually a true Gemini Lugna, would have been between 3:38 a.m. and 5:53 a.m. So if he was actually born around sunrise or before sunrise, then he would be a Gemini Lugna, not just for his sun sign, but for his constellation rising chart. So yeah, so he might be a Gemini Lugna, and actually a Gemini Lugna fits pretty well for him. So I wouldn't be surprised. The Day Lord, again, before 5:03 a.m., he would have been born into Venus period. After 5:03, it was a Saturn period. Ra Lord or Our Lord, we don't know because we don't have an exact birth time. The Lugna Nakshatra, so again, the rising sign, and Nakshatra is a lunar mansion. There are 27 lunar mansions. Each one has a different energy associated with it and symbols, and there are 27 of them, so every night the moon passes through a different one. So you end up with a lunar month after the moon has gone through all 27 lunar mansions or nakshatras. So Lugna nakshatra, the Lugna nakshatra we don't know because we don't have an exact birth time. The Sun nakshatra before 5:46 a.m. was an Ardra. Ardra is associated with a drop of water. That drop of water can be related to a storm cloud. So there tends to be a lot of stormy energy related to Ardra, like quick, sudden electric transformation type energy, which may be him again. He is, if you've ever heard him talk, I had the privilege of hearing him talk and live. I went up to Boston one time with some friends, and yeah, it was pretty amazing actually how he could keep. It was a huge room. It was like a basketball stadium where he was talking, and he kept everybody enthralled. But at 5:46 a.m., there was a change to Punarvasu, and that nakshatra, the symbol of that nakshatra. Oh, I forgot to mention with Ardra, besides being a potentially a drop of water from a storm cloud, it can be a drop of water like a teardrop. So there can be sadness associated with it, both storminess and sadness. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was an Ardra Lugna, because I think kind of his whole mission in life, at least this incarnation, has been about him dealing with a lot of sadness from being exiled from his country and leading his religious community without having like a homeland base. So I wouldn't be surprised. If he was born after 546, he would be a Punarvasu Sun Nakshatra. Punarvasu is symbolized by a quiver of arrows. So it has this sort of like, there's again sharp pointiness because of the arrow, but also the traveling. There's a lot of traveling or cycling involved. And so, that's also a possibility. I mean, he does have another planet, K2, the south node of the moon in Punarvasu. So we still, either way, we've got the Punarvasu energy there. But Punarvasu, again, has this traveling, commuting, cycling energy to it. Okay. The moon nakshatra, the moon was in Purva Falguni all day. Purva Falguni is related to a hammock or a marital bed, which may sound a little bit funny, considering who he was as a spiritual leader. But Purva Falguni, it can actually relate to marriage, like a spiritual marriage, especially when the planets are related to the ninth house of religion and spirituality, are in association or have some relationship with the Purva Falguni nakshatra. And we do actually, because the moon in this sun chart is in the third house and it's aspecting the ninth house of religion, spirituality, authority. And we have this massive Saturn that's retrograde. That line under Saturn in the ninth house means it's retrograde. And Saturn is in its own sign of Aquarius, that little 11 in that corner of the ninth house, down in the bottom right where you see Saturn underlined or SA underlined. The number 11 there stands for not the 11th house, but the 11th constellation of Aquarius, which is owned by Saturn. So you have Saturn in its own house, making it super strong, and it's retrograde. So very, very strong Saturn. And Saturn represents things like history and antiquity and tradition. So we're looking at a very long-standing tradition of spirituality and religion here, which that's what he does, right? And so you have this massive Saturn aspecting Moon, and Moon is aspecting Saturn. So these two are in what we call a mutual aspect. So there is that. So even though the moon is in Purva Falguni, which can symbolize things like, enjoyment and relaxation and pleasure and that sort of thing, I would see in his chart that that's really more like a, marriage to religion, sort of sacred connection or relationship there. Yeah. So the birth dasha, because he was important, the moon was in Purva Falguni for him all day, that means he was born at the birth dasha of Venus. Venus in his chart is in the third house of classical arts, so he is quite a creative guy, and he's like, I don't know what else other sort of creative things he's done, but he's published a bunch of books, and so the third house relates to nonverbal communication. Yeah. And Venus for him is in the nakshatra of Maga, which is symbolized by a throne. So there's some sort of creativity related to leadership here. And also, Maga resides in the star of K2. K2 is the south node of the moon, and it's related to it's got a hidden, unusual, unexpected, separatist type energy. So this can be like a creative, like governing body that's separate somehow, but also spiritual, because Ketu can also indicate like a spiritual seeker. And that's what he does. So this Venus is also aspecting this massive Saturn in the ninth house. So we're getting here, like when we putting this together, and Venus and Moon are both the emotional planets. Venus is also the worldly advisor in creativity. Moon is can be the public as well as like the intuitive mind, emotional mind. So when we put all this together, it's like a long-standing religious tradition that's like or authority of minds and hearts, I would say. But quite unusual as well. And the other thing is this Moon. Not only is it with Venus, but it's actually residing in Purva Falguni, and Purva Falguni is in the star of Venus. So it's a very Venusian type of moon here, So very, and Venus again is like social grace and you know connections, relationships, love, romance, even. So there's a lot of heartfelt energy related to this Saturn. Even though Saturn is probably gonna, um, it's gonna work both ways. Venus and Moon are gonna bring that more of that emotional energy to the Saturn, but Saturn is also maybe gonna suppress a bit Venus and Moon because that's what Saturn does. It creates like obstacles and delays. So there can be obstacles and delays related to emotional matters, such as him still. He spent his whole life in exile from his native land. So. Yeah, so the dasha sequence and the birth dasha, I didn't mention birth dasha, I should back up. So the dasha is a planetary period. The planetary period, or you can think of it as times when certain planets are more active or influential. So he was born into Venus, so he was a world, a practical counselor, also social grace diplomacy. I mean, he's for the most part, I think, well received. I mean, maybe not by the Chinese government, but I think most of the rest of the world sees him in a favorable light. So the Dasha sequence for him, so he's born into Venus, and they went through Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, and then Saturn, Mercury. So that's where he's at now. His current Dasha, again, we don't exactly know because there's a shift here. It changes at 5:59. So if he was born earlier, like from midnight of the day, like the first minute of the day to the last minute of the day, he was born either in Saturn Rahu, where if he was born in Saturn Rahu, he would have about 5 years left of the Saturn period. Or at the end of the day, he's in Mercury Jupiter currently. So what that's telling me is he's either currently in his Saturn or his Mercury Dasha period, his planetary period. And there's like a little bit of overlap. So especially again, if he was born in the morning around sunrise, before sunrise, that means he's transitioning out of his Saturn period right now, currently, and moving into his Mercury period. And that makes a lot of sense because the Saturn period would pick up this massive Saturn in the ninth house. And Saturn was going through Aquarius up until the end of March of this year for the last 2.5 years or so. So a lot of focus for him on, with Saturn in that house, building, rebuilding, problems building, delays in building, ninth house matters. So again, authority, government, um, father, guru, satsang. Satsang is spiritual community. Okay. And that's what we're looking at. And that's part of why, I mean, Saturn's no longer in Aquarius, it's moved into Pisces, but that's part of why this is on his mind and his focus right now. Is not just meaning that, I don't know if you've been following along with him, but in the news for a few weeks now, and more recently, in the last week, he's televised or posted some videos and things of him speaking of creating a new procedure protocol for choosing the next Dalai Lama. But he's, he's getting up there. This is his 90th birthday. And also, I think his health is a little bit compromised, so he's having a harder time keeping up with his duties and things like that. So the thing is with the traditional process for this sect of Buddhism to choose a new Dalai Lama is that the current Dalai Lama has to pass away, and then they spend potentially a few years looking for, it's been so far a child who they have certain ways of determining is like the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama spirit. And then that child has to go through the process of, spiritual training and that sort of thing, which could last 20 years or so. So on the short side, we're talking like 20 years, and on the longer side, who knows, 25, 30 years or whatever. But that means that this homeless spiritual community, global spiritual community, has no land, has no home base. And that's been part of the drive and the kind of authority keeping the tradition alive. And then it's also in contention because the Chinese government wants to install their own Dalai Lama. So there's a lot at stake for the sake of longevity of the Tibetan community, Tibetan Buddhism community, and transfer of power and leadership. And so that's what he's working on now. So hold on a second here. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just talk about his chart generally, and how it kind of represents him as a general person. Then I'm going to get into the houses on a more detailed level, each house on a more detailed level, and then I was going to talk about the current planetary transits and how it's not too surprising that again we're starting to hear from him and get messages from him regarding some new process for choosing the new Dalai Lama because of some political pressure. Okay, so again for him, his Surya Lagna, sun rising chart, he's a Gemini, or Mithuna in Sanskrit is what you would say. Mithuna Lagna, Gemini rising. So the Gemini is a dual air sign, Dvasva Bhava Vayu. So this is like multiple ideas, yeah, going back and forth, sometimes even contradictory ideas. And we have at the top here, we have a Swa, so Mercury in its own house, Digbala, directional strength Mercury. And Mercury is in its own house of Gemini because it rules Gemini. So we have a super strong Mercury and we have a super strong Lugna or rising sign here. That's going to make him and his whole chart very strong. Okay. So strong, not just in terms of like resilience, but it means that there's going to be a lot of power here. And also a lot of like, how would I say, like, a lot of good things will come to him, especially since Mercury's so strong. Okay. And especially when he runs Mercury, period. Okay. So, and Mercury is in Mrigashirsha nakshatra. Mrigashirsha is symbolized by deer's head. So it's this sort of like the deer wandering through the forest type of energy. It's kind of considered to be a seeking, searching type of energy. And Mercury represents the analytical mind. So he has a, analytical mind that's about searching and seeking, and probably like again thinking about both sides of an issue because again we have a dual air sign here. Okay. And then we have Sun. Sun is again in either Ardra or Punarvasu, which I've discussed. So Sun represents the soul, it represents the career, it represents the health. So either again Ardra, that storm cloud energy, electric. But also potentially sadness and psychology involved there. And Punarvasu is like traveling, cycling, but also like a sharpness. So again, and yeah, well, I'll keep going here with planets before I talk about other things. But then we have a Sundi Ketu. Okay, Sundi meaning Ketu is in the first or last degree. When we have a Sundi planet, the planet's in the first or last degree of any sign. And so what that does is it creates a lot of instability. Okay, because when the planets change signs, they're also changing elements because each sign is associated with a certain element. So Ketu is the south node of the moon. South node of the moon brings like hidden, unexpected energy, also spiritual seeking, can be spiritual, kind of like a separatist type energy. And Ketu is in Punarvasu as well. So this could be, and Punarvasi could be related to, because of its where its symbol is a quiver of arrows. The box that hangs on the back of the archer, that's sort of home base. And so this is potentially somebody who's separated from their home base, which makes sense for him. Okay. Then we also have an aspect of this Mercury Sun Ketu combination in the first house or Lugna by a Swa retrograde Jupiter. Jupiter is also retrograde. That makes it strong. Meaning, again, Jupiter will give quite strong results when it's activated. And then it's also Swa not by a sign because it's in Libra, which is owned by Venus, but actually it's in this nakshatra Vishaka, which is in the star of Jupiter. So Jupiter is Swa by star, whereas Mercury is Swa by constellation. So that means Mercury and Jupiter are both extremely strong here. They both have more than one primary strength. And Mercury represents the analytical mind, but it's also the teacher, it's also the scholar, it's also the analytical person. And also we have Mercury and Gemini. When we have Mercury in its own sign, either Gemini or Virgo, that's usually an indication that somebody will be involved in entrepreneurship on some level. And essentially, that's what he is. He's is running his own spiritual community. The other thing is that Mercury, as I mentioned in my talks, I mean, I've just seen this, often in charts. I haven't seen it written anywhere, but I often find people who are interested in meditation and Buddhism have Mercury in its own sign. And the reason why is, it's such a heady, mind-based practice for the spiritual tradition that it makes sense that Mercury has to be is usually strong for somebody who's like pretty deep into some sort of Buddhism and or meditation. Because what you're trying to do is you're trying to sort of, you know, lasso in and refine the mental habits that you have. And that takes a lot of discipline, organization, mental discipline, organization, which is all about Mercury. That's all the things that Mercury represents. Mercury is very detail oriented. It's also it's decisions, it's communication. So even that, like, how do you speak to yourself? How do you speak to your mind? How do you organize your thoughts in your mind? It's a deep, deep practice in Buddhism. So, so he's got that going on. And then Jupiter is super strong. And so Mercury might be like the student, like it's related to education and communication. And Jupiter is like the teacher, and it's also related to communication and publishing. So when we have these two massive planets, basically the energies of them in the Lugna, we're going to have a scholar, we're going to have a teacher, we're going to have a student, we're going to have an author, we're going to have somebody creating news, and communication. All there, very strong for him. Yeah. And then on top of that, so that's just sort of a little bit about the house and the planets for the Lugna here, but then he's got a bunch of yogas. So yogas are graha yogas or planetary yogas or combinations. So when you get planets in certain places or located with other planets, then you get these yogas, and these yogas produce meta effects for somebody's chart. So for him, again, if we're just looking at the Lugna here, the rising sign, ascendant, he's got a Pravraja yoga. So the three planets at the top here, Mercury, Sun, and Ketu. When you have that many planets in a certain house, usually 3 or 4, depending on if it's a negative or positive house, it creates a life focus. So his life focus is, again, this really strong Mercury with Sun and Ketu. And again, when you have the 3 planets that are, I see most associated with some sort of like separatist type of energy are Mercury, Ketu, and Saturn. So he's got this really strong Mercury with this kind of Sunday Ketu, this unstable Ketu in the Lugna. So he himself, just in and of himself, can be quite separate, but again, as a spiritual seeker. Yeah, and again, that's part of the tradition. And then he's got this massive Saturn in the 9th house of spiritual community and institution, which is what he's a leader of. Yeah. So he's got the Pravraja yoga. He's also got a Bhadra yoga. So that's this Mercury in its own sign in a positive house. That's a Panchamahapurush yoga, which is one of the five great being yogas. So that's going to give him a lot of power, as an individual. And then he's also got a Buddhaditya yoga in this rising sign here. So that's Mercury and Sun together in the same constellation, but usually you have to qualify it, but it has to be, because that combination has to be related to the first, second, or fifth house, and it's right there at the top. So Buddhaditya yoga will bring a lot of intelligence, especially related to like more of a math, science, calculating type of mindset. So highly intelligent. So these three alone, highly focused, highly intelligent, and then like amazing, very strong Mercury. So it's going to be like communication skills, decision making, thought process, that sort of thing. Okay. So altogether, when you bring all these different elements of the Lugna, this rising sign together, you get strength, focus on transforming the self. Because again, this going back and forth, this duality of ideas, it's about transforming the self. Because Mercury is also, did I list it here? No, Mercury is also bhavam. So it's going to be the first, what is it? The Lord of the first house has gone to the first house. That means that there's going to be an emphasis on using this very strong Mercury strength of mind, intelligence, but separation to kind of hone the mind, go back and forth, like, focus the mind that can wobble back and forth, like most of us. A lot of people, like when I talk to them about meditation, they have a hard time even sitting for 30 seconds or a minute without their mind, all the thoughts just sort of tumbling through their mind. And so that's part of the transformative spiritual seeking process for him and his, group, is like, how do we sort out this, potential chaos in our heads so that we can, because if we figure that out and we straighten that out, then, that should play out in more clear ways and peaceful ways in our lives and with our relationships, So, yeah, so focus on transforming the self, seeking a home, because the Mercury, this really strong Mercury is also the Lord of the fourth house of home and lineage. And we have Mars there. Mars is a leadership planet, but it's also a rebellious planet. And Mars also represents land. So this could literally be, rebellious motherland or rebelling, against the motherland here in his chart. Okay, so he's seeking, but this Mercury is in the seeking energy of Mrigashirsha, so he's seeking a homeland, some home base, for himself and his group. Spiritual seeker, I mentioned meditation, Buddhism, also jovial. Mercury can bring a lot of it can be a lot of playful energy, joking energy, and he is, again, that's sort of his personality. He's always sort of a jovial, happy guy, joking around, laughing. It's really kind of funny. His laugh's pretty pretty prominent and infectious. The thing though is that this Jupiter is that's aspecting the Lugna is in a nakshatra called Vishaka. Vishaka is symbolized by a victory gate. But this kind of victory, and there are several nakshatras and different victory, with different victorious type energies. They all have different flavors, and so the flavor of Vishaka is victory at a cost. And so he was able to again lead his people, and a lot of people respect him and look up to him and that sort of thing. But he still, towards the end of his life, at least not yet, has been able to find or remedy the fact that his people are exiled from their original homeland. So there has been success, but protecting that lineage at what cost? There has been a cost to that. And as I mentioned, scholar, author, leader, all of these things, because Sun is there. And Sun represents like the king or president. So he's a leader of spiritual transformations. How would I say it? Like a leader, speaker, educator, spiritual counselor for those who are seeking, Buddhism and meditation and spiritual, you know, um, development. It's all there. Just the first house there. That's a lot that you can unpack from that. And again, he's detached, but again, through his spiritual training, I would say a lot of intelligence, an independent mind for sure. The K2 will bring this kind of unusual, energy to him. K2 and Rahu, Saturn also can indicate like a foreignness, and he is sort of, again, a bit homeless. But also, again, the independent business with Mercury in its own sign. And then media news, who's going to generate media news. And K2 there, that can literally be like, especially a lot of online stuff. So I don't know what he's doing. I don't follow him too closely personally, but probably all the, when he first started, he had to do all this sort of publicity of his cause, without technology, without like the internet. I'm sure like he can reach a lot more people now that, the internet exists and that sort of thing. Okay, so that again, and then all of that I just talked about sets again a tone for the rest of his chart. So he does have other yogas besides the ones in his lugna. He has a shasha yoga, that's the Saturn in its own sign, and a positive house, the ninth house. That's also a Panchamaha Purush yoga, or indication of a great being. And that will bring power, leadership, and also helpful servants or people to help him. He also has a Kala Sarpa yoga, so that's going to be um, most of the planets on one side of the Rahu Ketu axis, the other. That's going to bring again ambition, energy. And he's got a Kuja dosha, or he's Mongolic, so that's Mars in the fourth house. This can bring difficulties with spouse, but again, he's not married, so again, because of his position here, so sort of makes sense, but might be a point for him. Might, I don't know, maybe that helps him be more focused on the religious work. Then he has a Sunafa lunar yoga. That's the Mars in the second house from the moon. That will make somebody a monarch, which essentially he is. Spiritual royalty, bring wealth, intelligence, and respect, and he has all those things. Also, this very strong disposer or landlord of the first house, which is Mercury in its own sign, that creates a parvata yoga. Parvata number 1, because there are several versions of parvata. I call it parvata 1. That will bring wealth, happiness, also creating or doing acts of lasting benefit to others, which he has, and also a ruler. All these things are true for him. He also has a kahala to be yoga, and that is the very strong fourth house lord, which is Mercury, and in association with Jupiter. Since Jupiter's aspecting Mercury, I would take that. And that's going to make him energetic, courageous, crafty, also a leader of armies and villages, which essentially all the different smaller groups of Tibetan Buddhists around the world. So that all seems to be true. Also, he does seem to have a Lakshmi yoga, which is a yoga of mega wealth, actually. So that's a really strong ninth house lord, Saturn retrograde in Aquarius. And then for him, he also has a strong lugna. So that creates a Lakshmi yoga of mega wealth. So you can see there's multiple yogas indicating wealth, intelligence, happiness, respect, power. And then he also has srinantha yoga, which is a spiritual yoga. It brings wealth, soft-spokenness, recitations like reciting ancient texts, which is what he does. If you've ever heard him, I heard him once. I think it was around New Year's one year. I found him on the internet, just somehow clicked on him, and he was doing all these like long recitations of ancient Buddhist text, and also have like an attractive personality. Like again, most people, I don't know, even people who are not deep into Buddhism, I think, have generally good thoughts about the Dalai Lama. But maybe that's more United States based. Because he has, I think, a lot of support here. But so this Srinantha Yoga, that's because the ninth lord is very strong, and then he has a very strong Mercury, and then I would say the fifth lord as well. Or not the fifth lord, but Venus is fairly strong as well. So Yeah. So he's got all those nice yogas supporting him. Again, most people don't have nearly this many yogas. Okay, this is quite unusual. And also, not only does he have these yogas, but these yogas are very strong, especially because of the condition of the planets. I mean, any of these yogas that are formed by the Saturn, which is massively strong, being retrograded in its own house, is going to bring him more of these things. And this massive Mercury with directional strength and swa in its own um, house, or in its own constellation, again, Mercury is going to give him a lot. And the thing is, as I mentioned, he's running, either the tail end of Saturn or the beginning of Mercury. So he's, again, physically might be a bit frail, which I will talk about, but he's going to have a lot of power right now. And he's going to have to kind of cash in, so to speak, on all these resources he has to create this new tradition, in the spiritual lineage here to find the new leader so that, again, the spiritual community is, not lacking a leader for maybe 20 or plus years. Okay, so also, since we don't have an exact birth time, I can't really get into the amshas or subdivisional charts because those are based on exact birth time. But we can pull from them chidra grahas or planets of vulnerability. So planets of vulnerability can literally be like sensitive spots or like an Achilles heel for somebody. And for him, Saturn and Mars. Saturn and Mars both represent property. Okay, Saturn also represents tradition, and it's in the ninth house here. So spirituality, religion, authority. Those things can be, kind of a hot topic for him, and they have been for decades now. And then Mars, again, Mars is another property planet, but Mars also represents siblings and enemies, um, and also disputes, and rebelliousness. So, again, that's not what he would prefer. You know, um, he's had to lead, again, his, group of people through this, long fight without resolution as of yet. And it's not what he would prefer. I would again guess, again, if his son is an Ardra, that it's caused him a lot of sadness and distress that, that his people have to be sort of homeless. He has to be homeless. The organization, the kind of more ideological organization that he's leader of, um, doesn't have a home base. And then for him, his yogi, ava yogi, and duplicate yogi, these are planets representing wealth or lack of wealth. So his yogi, which represents wealth, is Rahu, and Rahu is in the seventh house here of partnership. Rahu also is the north node of the moon. Moon, it represents ambition, but kind of unusual. So seeking foreign, I think, partnerships, but also potentially money. Or there can be a lot of money coming through foreign partnerships. Like the United States. I know there are a lot of people in the United States, prominent people who support the Dalai Lama and do a lot of fundraising for him. And then the Aviyogi is Venus, so this can be a planet indicating lack of wealth. So I know he's written some books and that sort of thing, but Venus represents creativity. So there can be loss of wealth through, I think, creativity for him, or at least it may not bring him, be a major source of income for him, even though I'm sure he's made plenty of, money off his books, but relatively speaking, in publishing books, I mean, that can be a kind of a tricky business, but I'm sure his, status and rank and celebrity help him sell some books. Then the duplicate yogi, which is another planet representing wealth, is this massive Saturn. So, his spiritual community, brings wealth. So again, when we look at these planets, like what's kind of influencing money for him? Well, Rahu is like ambition, but unusual partnerships or unusual maybe how do I say, like sources of income. Venus, arts and creativity, and then Saturn, again, land, institution, authority, religion. This is what's kind of influencing money for him. So now we'll look at the individual houses. Okay, so on this slide, all the stuff on the left is the same, just on the right. These are my notes for the individual houses I'll be going through. So the second house lord is dark moon, that's bhavam, which is in Purva Falguni. So that already, so the second lord of moon has gone 2 houses away. So there's going to be like one communication after another. Yeah. And that's, especially with this Jupiter and Mercury in the first house, he's going to be all about media and publication and teaching and, not just like teaching the, kind of, to Tibetan Buddhism science of, harnessing the mind, but just the cause. So, many public emotional discussions about difficulty regarding siblings and neighbors. So, siblings and neighbors, that's like a literal symbol of this, the third house where the moon is. But siblings and neighbors could be like, spiritual brothers and sisters, and neighbors could be like neighboring countries, and like the skirmish, long-term skirmish with China. So the third house lord is Sun, and we've got Venus and Maga and Moon. It's also aspected by this mouse of Saturn. Saturn's in Shatabisha. Shatabisha is literally translates as 100 healers. So Saturn, though, is a natural malefic planet. And so Shatabisha, when you have planets or placements in Shatabisha, this can indicate, healing something that's difficult to heal, um, having a positive result, or something that has since Saturn represents longevity and tradition and obstacles and delays, this could be like a long-term problem healing, spiritual community. But also, again, this massive Saturn is aspecting the third house of this, um, emotional problem with, again, siblings and neighbors. Yeah. So, yeah, so also the arts, Venus and Moon represent the arts, and that is in the third house. So there is some creative, say, creativity here for sure, especially since the third house represents classical arts. And with Saturn aspecting Venus and Moon, this is like the classical traditional art of meditation and dealing with difficult emotions. So that's part of why emotions are part of what swing the mind and cause distress internally. And when the person's distressed, they tend to create more chaos around them. That's sort of where they're. It's trying to create equilibrium within to manifest equilibrium without. In the external world. So there can be problems here with art. Again, women. I wasn't sure about this. I don't know how it works in Tibetan Buddhism, like how if there are maybe some restrictions with how far, at least today, in current times, if today, how far women can, um, excel in the hierarchy of the Tibetan Buddhism culture or the institution. So there might be some, I would say, I'm guessing from this restrictions, but I don't know for sure. Um, And then again, I would also say like unusual because Venus again is the worldly counselor, but it's in the star of Ketu, so there's going to be this unusual kind of emotional leadership, and Ketu is in Punarvasu, like traveling, unusual emotional traveling leadership, which is the whole community, but also him as a person. Again, bringing teaching people about Buddhism, but also teaching people about the cause. Um, So, and also, like, I would say some sort of plea with neighbors here, emotional plea with neighbors, trying to get support for the cause. And then there's also, I would say, difficulty in healing the mind because the Saturn this massive Saturn on the moon. Usually when somebody has Saturn, with or aspecting their moon, Saturn can bring like anxiety, doubt, skepticism, fear, that sort of thing. And so Saturn, this massive Saturn, is on both of the emotional planets, Venus and Moon. So again, there's a lot of emotional distress going on here with neighbors, but also authority and the institution as a whole. And this can also be difficult to heal the mind, which again, the moon is the intuitive mind, and emotions and relationships, because Venus is relationships generally, and then moon is public, so public relationship. In the fourth house lord is this massive Mercury I mentioned. Mars is there. Mars is in Chitra. Chitra, that's nakshatra symbolized by a gemstone. So it can literally mean like wealth, like a shiny diamond. But Mars represents, Chitra also represents like architecture because it's specifically a gemstone that's cut, like with the different facets of a diamond. So there's some structure to it. But Mars represents rebellion, it represents leadership, it represents land. And this is in the fourth house of land and home and, even mother here. So I'm seeing like there's disruptions here, difficulty settling down, land disputes going on here. Also displacement, like, exile from home, arguments regarding structure of land, wealth, leadership, groups, and enemies, because the Mars is the lord of the sixth house of enemies here, and it's also the lord of the 11th house of clubs, groups, and society. So again, this is all about like, we don't have we don't have a home base here that's legitimized by our neighbors, so we're just going to keep fighting potentially. But again, this if you're a religious institution who's trying to maintain peace and create peace within people, then it's like what sort of um, what kind of like weapons can you use? Well, it looks like it's more appealing to people's emotions and also educating people about issues. Since K2 is in Punarvasu, K2 is like can be technology, and Punarvasu is like again that cycling energy that could be like and also the arrow, right? It's like the um, digital internet news is maybe that's the weapon. You could literally see it like that. In the fifth house lord is Venus. We have a retrograde karako bhava nashya Jupiter in Vishaka, a victory, but victory at a cost. Jupiter again, spiritual advisor, and this is in the fifth house of spiritual advisement. Also, K2 is aspecting here. So, a spiritual advisor about, again, like some sort of unusual kind of separatist type of spiritual practice. This could also literally be like chanting mantras, which I know he does a lot. Um, and then the retrograde Jupiter is going to make it strong. And Venus, the Lord, has gone to a negative house. Again, siblings and neighbors, suppressed emotions. So he's also advising people about, not just the technology or uh, um, the content of spirituality, but again, about the cause of the group, spiritual group here. But also Jupiter can represent education, publishing, speech, and the fifth house can represent like a public stage. And again, with K2 there, like foreign public stages, internet public stage, speaking, writing. Jupiter, the Karko Bhavanasha piece, that's Jupiter, which represents children, in the fifth house representing children. So there can be difficulty with children. And again, for him as a spiritual seeker, um, that may sort of be a non-issue or actually may be helpful, you know, uh, that, that's not really in the cards for him, it looks like. So, having children. Um, and again, this K2 aspecting the fifth house, and then the Lord of the fifth house being a negative uh, house, and then Venus, and then that Lord Venus in the star of K2 like there's letting go or releasing of having children. Um, at least biological children, seems like, yeah. Um, so technology again is part of this public stage of speaking and writing. Again, it's going to be a little bit unusual. Maybe there may be some, detachment, like, and again, success at a cost here. Then the sixth house, the south lord, is this Mars. It's aspected by a Swa retrograde Saturn. So there's going to be in Sha to be Sha. So again, long problems, long term, difficult issues that are hard to um, resolve with enemies. And the problem is the ideology, because Saturn in Aquarius is a fixed air sign. So so it applies. So his ninth house, this really strong Saturn retrograde in its own sign in the ninth house, not only applies to his religious community, but it applies to governments. So they're both stuck in their long-term traditional ideology. The Chinese government and his religious community here. So they're both very set in their ideology, and that's part of what's driving this land war here. So the enemy ideology is difficult to change and heal, not just his own community. And then also, but there is some sort of transformation of traditional habits too, I would say. Because the Saturn is going to like slowly grind down on the sixth house, which is not only a house of enemies, but also daily habits. So this could also be like his day-to-day, like very stringent religious practice, his own, very formal daily routine he has. Yeah, so then the seventh house lord is Jupiter. Again, victory at a cost is partnerships. We have a Sundi, Rahu, and Uttarashada. So, there's Uttarashada is another victory nakshatra, but the symbol of that one is an elephant's tusk. So it's like this sharp, piercing victory. So it's like this sharp, piercing victory, you know, um, of foreign or unusual partners. And we also have aspect of Mars. So, he's got a lot of, I would say, strong, unusual partners who are, fighting for him. And also, the seventh house represents the path in life. So there's ambition and there's victory here, and quite a bit. Also, this kind of fiery energy coming from Mars. So, and Mars and Rahu together, that can bring Rahu on its own, Rahu and Ketu, the north and south nodes in the moon, they can bring on their own this kind of obsessive, compulsive, impulsive energy. And then when you have Mars involved, um, on the Rahu Ketu axis, that's going to bring like obsessive actions, because Mars is action. It's going to be obsessive leadership here. And then you have Mercury on the Rahu Ketu axis. So that's going to bring all the decisions and planning and communication, a lot of um, unusual thoughts, but also like obsessive thoughts. So it's like, it's sort of like it's this whole life, of being this very focused, obsessive, life on his content of what he does, the Tibetan Buddhism, but also like again the cause of being homeless with his spiritual community. And there might even be sometimes when I see Mars with Rahu together, like because it's like impulsive, compulsive, it's not always the most efficient. It can be a bit of a goose chase because it's sort of like one action after another, but it's again, Mars is more of an erratic planet, so it may not always be, again, the most efficient. It might even be a bit of a goose chase at times. Then the eighth house lord is Saturn, and it's this massive Saturn that's gone to the ninth house. So, um, it's like his mind is all about the institution and religion. It's like he's very focused. Again, we've seen that from the beginning, like very focused on basically these two things: spiritual community, but then also the you know fight over physical home for the spiritual community. Then and also this the eighth house also represents deep psychology. So his deep psychology is this massive Saturn, because that's the lord of the eighth house. And Saturn, Shatabisha, the symbol of Shatabisha is a circle. So again, it's quite an abstract. Like it's very different from a lot of nakshatras where, like, Ardra is a storm cloud and Push is the cow's udder and Punarvasu is the quiver of arrows, which are all very mundane. With Shatabisha, you get this like circle, which again is this, like traveling type energy, cycling energy, but in a very abstract way. And that's again quite a bit of, Buddhism and meditation, you know. So, again, his whole mind is focused on this stuff. And so then the ninth house, again, this massive Saturn Shatabisha aspected by Moon, Venus, Ketu. So traditional authority with unshakable ideology. Again, that's the satsang religious community, but also the Chinese government. Long-standing religion. Also, when you get Saturn in its own sign, you can usually get people who are interested in things like, I've heard specifically India. Okay. But I think just this sort of area of the world, like, the sort of India, China, like the sort of Himalayas, like that kind of, it's a few different countries. And again, the countries are man-made, but again, it's like this very deep, long-standing traditional world, which is that area of the world. Um, and again, leadership of the public heart and mind, that's the Venus and the moon coming in there. But again, that Ketu is going to bring separateness and traveling. So there's some sort of emotional exile going on here as well. Then the 10th house lord is Jupiter, aspected by Mars. Again, there's an ongoing emotional fight, because it's Pisces in the 10th house here. There's a dual water sign, so mixed emotions. And it can also literally be overseas, because Pisces is a 12th, natural 12th house, so overseas and remote land. So like emotional fighting over remote overseas land, which is, and the 10th house is like 9 to 5 work. So that's what he does. But you could also see it, since it's a dual water sign. It's just the land, it might be physical land, like, fighting with China, but it's also the land space in your head. That's part of what meditation is about, is trying to prevent so much, tossing to and fro of the mind, and getting clarity there and settling that down. So again, I think it works both ways. Then the 11th house lord is Mars, and aspect is on very strong group here of pioneers and rebels, it looks like. But also, the 11th house is also income. So there is a lot of money coming in, and it's aspected. But the thing is, it's aspected by Saturn, and Saturn is debilitated in the 11th house. So we have this massively strong Saturn and this massively debilitated. Well, it's a massively strong Saturn on its own from its origin, but then it's debilitated in the 11th house. So it's like blocking groups, like authority blocking groups, authority blocking income, that kind of stuff. And then also Jupiter's aspecting there. So this is like fighting over destruction of spiritual group, land, income, and again, winning at all costs. So, the group has been maintained for the most part. It's still pretty strong from what I understand. But yeah, there's like authority, comes with authority, you know, um, dismantling it, or at least trying to. And then the 12th house here, the 12th house lord is Venus, which again is, in Maga, in the star of Ketu. And, the 12th house is related to losses, expenditures, and that sort of thing. So again, I'm seeing this like sadness with loss of relationships, siblings, neighbors, friends. Like, the falling out, and also diplomacy as well, because Venus represents diplomacy, and the 12th house represents like laws of expenditures, remote places, but also like um, isolated places and foreign overseas things. And Venus represents diplomacy. So again, this ongoing fight, it's been decades that he's been trying to ameliorate the situation. So yeah, so those are the individual houses for him. And then on the next slide, I was going to look at the current transits. And so why, again, succession specifically is on his mind and what we might see there. Okay, so all the stuff on the left is the same, but on the right now, what I have here is a chart for, it's basically a solar return chart for him. So the sun is in the exact same degree. The only thing is that I have it oriented towards a Gemini Lugna, so we can compare a Gemini chart with another Gemini chart. Okay, and I put in a few arrows just to kind of see some of the influences here, but I've also circled what's important here. I circled Saturn and Mercury and the houses that they own, because again, his current dasha is either the very tail end of Saturn or Mercury. And so those are the planets that are going to be more, again, active, influential for him, including the houses that they own. So again, whether he's in Saturn or Mercury, again, he's either finished the Saturn and that's where he's been, and now he's moving to Mercury, or he's in the process of transitioning from Saturn to Mercury. So they're both actually important in terms of knowing like where he's been and where he's going, and why this is even, again, a thing for him. Yeah. So his exact Saturn return is July 7th, 2025, 1:30 a.m. And again, this is based on his birth place, Taxter, Tibet. Again, this is a Gemini Lugna, so we can compare apples to apples here. Gemini Lugna to Gemini Lugna, Gemini rising to Gemini rising. But again, the overlap period, so the Saturn period, Dasha period, lasts 19 years, and the Mercury Dasha period lasts 17 years. So altogether, that's 36 years. So if we take 10% of that, that's going to be 3.6 years. So 3.6 years on either side. There's going to be almost a 7.5 year transition period, moving from the Saturnian Dasha energy into the Mercury Dasha energy. Okay. So even if he's, at the tail end of Saturn, he's still starting to kind of light up. The Mercury Dasha is waking up. And even if he's at the fairly early stages, within the first 3.5, 4 years of the Mercury period, he's still got a lot of the Saturnian energy going on. So again, it's, it kind of worked out that he's straddling probably the Saturn and Mercury periods. But okay, so let's look at, if he is currently in the Saturn Dasha, focus on the blue circles here. So I've circled Saturn, which is in his 10th house, and I've circled the houses that Saturn owns. So again, the 8th house and the 9th house. So, Saturn, again, obstacles, delays, problems, long-term issues, can be death, also can be chronic health. And the thing is, Saturn is in, again, the last 2 years, it was in, 3 years before recently, until the end of March, it was in the 9th house. So he basically went through a Saturn return. And 3 years before that, during the pandemic, basically Saturn was going through his 8th house of deep psychology, but also long-term problems and that sort of thing. The other thing is that basically the last few years, like I would say, if we say 2.5 in the 8th house and 2.5 in the 9th house, now he's starting up, the last 5 years, his mobility is probably going to be compromised because Saturn represents neuromuscular problems. And so what I've seen, I don't follow him again too much, but I've just seen a few video clips, and he actually has a couple of aides who help him walk, like support him as he's walking around now. I don't remember. I mean, I haven't seen videos about him for a long time, so he needs that support now. And again, Saturn is the ruler, of his 8th house of and ninth house, and those they medically those houses relate to the upper legs. So he probably has hip problems and a weakness in his upper thighs and legs, and now like his knees probably because the 10th house is knees. So basically, the upper part of his legs and pelvis are growing weak. There are problems there essentially. But this, so besides the medical stuff, Saturn again is picking up this eighth house of deep psychology. So he's thinking a lot. And the ninth house of, again, government, authority, institutions, satsang, spiritual community. Okay. And Saturn is now in his 10th house of 9 to 5 work. So he's going to bring this eighth house energy and ninth house energy to his daily work. And right now, Saturn is in a nakshatra called Uttar. Uttar is symbolized by the back legs of a funeral pyre. So, a funeral pyre, like cremation. So, flames and ash and fire and, that sort of thing. Very big, long term, how would I say, like a destructive period. Okay, but also like Uttar is just after Purva Bhadrapada. Purva Bhadrapada is much more like chaotic and just the things burning down and turning to ash. Uttar Bhadrapada, where Saturn currently is, has that cremation energy, but it also has this notion of like surrendering and letting go and transcending. And so there can be this energy of reincarnation, essentially. Okay, so and part of that tradition, again, I don't know too much about it, but part of the tradition in Tibetan Buddhism is this notion that I think he's even said it, is that he's planning on reincarnating to, become the Dalai Lama again. I think that's what he said. And so there may be, I don't know, there's a lot of deep, long-term spiritual processes in Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, I don't know much about them, but there might be some protocol related to, I mean, it's kind of even blows my mind, but I'm like, they might be accessing some sort of spiritual protocol to reincarnate, you know. I don't know. That's kind of news to me because I didn't know you could actually sort of choose your reincarnation, but maybe they know how. I don't know. Maybe they have some special, insight on that. But so if we're just picking up the Saturnian energy, like his daily work, so Saturn's in the 10th, his daily work is about transitioning and about reincarnation and surrendering, to this notion of his physical body passing. Okay. And then, there's going to be some sort of unusual long-term change of mind related to the institution, because that's the ambition is coming and unusualness is coming from Rahu, because Rahu is in that Purva Bhadrapada energy, that funeral pyre energy, without the surrender, piece to it or level to it. So Rahu, there's some ambition in the ninth house in this institution of burning things down. So again, we had this massive Saturn, retrograde Saturn, and so it's like, keep the structure, keep the tradition. And now we have Rahu going in there with Mars. So Mars is so now there's ambition of rebellion, okay, in the ninth house. And again, it's some sort of turning over, unusual turning over or destruction even of the long-term processes, because Saturn is like bureaucracy also. So it's like some unusual, rebellious initiative to overturn long-term policies, and that's what he's doing by, again, like saying, we're gonna change things up. We're not gonna wait until I pass and then find a child and then grow them up and then leave our spiritual community on its own for 20 something years. So you can see that going on for him, and that's again what's on his mind. And again, maybe he's currently running a Rahu subperiod, or a Saturn subperiod, or a Mars subperiod, and that's part of why there's this initiative and change going on. But you can see that there is a change going on. So also from this, again, Saturn dasha, assuming he's in that or moving through the last bits of it, or out of it, but still, the remnants of it going into Mercury now. There's again some ambition to choose a new spiritual leader. We can see that leadership is from Mars. Unusual and ambition comes from Rahu. And again, spiritual leader is coming from, because Jupiter is also aspecting this ninth house. So Jupiter and Mars together can be spiritual leader. Jupiter and Mars together can also be law. So, and we're talking about the ninth house here. So government or religious, institution. So there's some ambition to change the religious or, institution laws. But this could also relate to the Chinese government, because they're trying to create their own, thing now too, in terms of they want to choose their own Dalai Lama. So the other thing is that uh, the other thing to know, and then let me just back up here. So the other thing is that, again, this is going to be in writing. There's some sort of creative writing plan, because we have Mars and K2 in the third house here of nonverbal communication. So there's some sort of unusual kind of creative process going on, writing up, developing this new protocol here. Okay. So the other thing is that, again, Saturn is in this 10th house here, but it will be moving into the 11th house February of 2028. Okay. So once Saturn moves into Aries in the 11th house, because he's got Aries in the 11th house, Saturn's debilitated there. Okay. And so that's not going to be great news for the 11th house for him. The 11th house represents group. It also represents, income. Also, the lower legs. So if he's having trouble with his legs, again, it looks like it's just sort of descending maybe. The other thing is that Saturn is going to aspect the lugna. So this debilitated Saturn is going to aspect his lugna, and lugna the rising sign represents the physicality and the psychology of somebody. That's going to be a lot of pressure, a lot of delays, obstacles. That can be a very tough period, especially when you have this debilitated Saturn on your lugna. Okay. So that could be like a dip, pretty big dip, unfortunately, in his health. Okay, once we get to February 2008, and again, Saturn takes about 2.5 years to go through each sign. So, again, I'm guessing he's got his own astrologers who are on this, and yeah, I'm sure they know more about this than I do. But you can see that it looks like he's trying to, while he's still in pretty good shape and of sound mind and probably body, or at least good enough right now, he's trying to set this up to have some sort of smooth transition here for his community. Yeah. And what's interesting too is I also did a chart. I went through Elon Musk's chart recently. He's an entrepreneur and involved in big, world-known, worldwide enterprises like Tesla, electric vehicles, and formerly Twitter X, social media, and SpaceX, so commercial space travel and stuff like that. And he's been going through a lot of revamping of his entrepreneurial ventures and things like that. And one of the things, like literally this week, is that he came up with some news as well, where he's creating like a third political party in the United States. So he's announced this, and now he's getting people on board or whatever. And that's fine. And he also has a Sun and Mercury in Gemini. Um, so sort of similar to the Dalai Lama. So he also will be experiencing this Rahu in the ninth house on some level. And so he is also going through like a ambitious rewriting of, at least for him, maybe not religious, but political law, or structure because again, him and a lot of other people, he and a lot of other people don't feel like the two-party system is sufficient or working well or whatever. People don't have many options, like just between the two, and the two aren't great options or whatever, So again, in his own way, Elon Musk, who has some similar, things in his chart, is also generating buzz, speech, and that's because of Mercury. We'll get to Mercury next, but Mercury is in the fourth house, and Mercury represents communication, and it's in the second house of communication. Literally, when these announcements were coming out from the Dalai Lama and also Elon Musk. So that's kind of, again, where the Dalai Lama is regarding Saturn now, and where Saturn is going once it moves in Aries, which will bring, I think, a tougher time for him, both mentally and physically, once February 2028 rolls around. So as far as Mercury, I did mention it's in the second house. Mercury represents communications in the second house of oral communication. Excuse me. But luckily, Mercury is in a nakshatra called Pucha. Sorry, I'm trying to keep myself hydrated here so my voice doesn't go too far off, but it looks like it's happening anyway. Sorry. So Mercury is in Pucha. Pucha is represented by a cow's udder. So Pucha is related to emotional stability, physical stability, nurturing, the way a cow does, like the way it offers milk, not only to its own children, but to adopted species such as humans, so that when we're orphaned, from our own mothers, that's kind of why, in India, cows are revered, is because it's like, wow, this generous cow is, not only feeding its own babies, but, some of us who've been orphaned, from other species. So anyway, Mercury is in Pusha, so you can see the supportive, nurturing speech. And what is the speech going to be regarding to? Well, the first house, which I circled in green, and the fourth house. So first house is self, fourth house is home lineage. So some supportive, nurturing speech regarding self, lineage, and concerns of successful public alliance. The reason why is that the lord of the fourth house is Moon, and Moon has gone to the sixth house of enemies and troubles, acute troubles, and sorry, my voice is really kind of getting stuck up. I guess I'm talking too loud too. But Moon, luckily, during this exact solar return, because you can see Sun is exactly in both charts at 20 degrees 41 minutes of Gemini. Moon is in a really nice nakshatra. So Mercury's in a nice nakshatra, Pusha. Moon is also in a very nice nakshatra. You can see it just transitioned into that because it transitioned at 3 degrees 20 minutes of Scorpio, which is where the moon is, just passed in the sixth house of enemies and acute problems. The moon represents the public, and that nakshatra it's in is Anuradha. So Anuradha comes after Vishaka. Vishaka was the victory at all costs. Anuradha is the victory through creating bridges and alliances. And so there's concerns about successful public alliance here, and that's what he's speaking about. Also strong public enemies, because Mars is aspecting its own house, and Mars represents enemies, but the sixth house for Gemini Lugna is ruled by Mars. So very strong enemies here, but also how do we nurture and support the public, and speak about some sort of new, unusual, ambitious transition protocol, so that people aren't left in lurch for, again, 20-something years. So, and then also there should be, you can see Jupiter and Sun are now in Gemini, and they're both aspecting the, what is it, the seventh house here of partnerships, but also the path forward in life. And also, so is Saturn as well. So again, this is like, and Jupiter is aspecting its own sign of Sagittarius. So there's strength here in the seventh house of partnerships, um, leadership, and also long-term, the longevity of a spiritual tradition here in terms of the path forward. Okay, and again, because of this, just because Sun is an energetic, fiery planet with Jupiter here, again, what we're getting is, uh, mm, a spiritual leadership. The other thing is Jupiter is at this time currently combust. When a planet's combust, you don't see the external manifestations of something. But the inner manifestations of that planet and what it symbolizes are stronger. So Jupiter represents, balance, fairness, law. Then more internally, it's like equilibrium and charity and spirituality and intuition and wisdom. Okay, so it's interesting again from an astrology perspective is that and Jupiter is in this now in the storm cloud, Ardra energy. So there's this transformation of the independent business as well as the way forward. And then Sun is now just recently shifted into Punarvasu. So there's this like cycling energy again of soul. Um, it's just an interesting choice of timing because again, if Jupiter is combust, that means that the seventh house of independent business is not something that's going to be tangible. It's going to be more of like a, when I say like, it's going to be more of like a ephemeral type of spiritual partnerships of path forward. Um, and there are also going to be obstacles and some delays, but also tradition because Saturn is aspecting there as well. But it's just interesting because actually in a few days, like July 9th, just a couple days after this, Jupiter will not be combust anymore. And so it's sort of like there will be more balance and fairness externally, but also there'll be more materialization, like literal manifestation, physical, mundane manifestation of partnerships. And so it's just interesting that it's like, I don't know if that was done on purpose or not, or if it was just decided that his birthday would bring, on its own is going to bring news and, more people just thinking about him, talking about it, whatever. And they thought maybe it's better to align with that just to get more information, get more buzz on this transition that's happening within the religious institution. But as an astrologer, I'm just wondering if he's sort of setting himself up. At least Mercury is now not combust, so at least the fourth house of home will have this nurturing energy and stability energy and mundane um, manifestation energy. But then the path forward in the partnerships will be more abstract, more internal. And again, if they had waited a couple days, then again, things always change for different reasons. But again, even the partnerships would be more physical, tangible as well. So it's just an interesting choice if there was an astrologer, behind the scenes helping them decide when to post these things and the newsreels and the videos and the send the news out and that sort of thing. Looks like it was more surrounded around his birthday. But yeah, so we'll see. But again, this is a lot of the reason why this stuff is coming out now, why it's coming out now, and why it's been on his mind, and what, again, the plans are symbolizing these transitions that are happening within the religious institution, and that's what he's working on. So, yeah, there you go. Dalai Lama, 14th Dalai Lama, and his plans for succession. So, as always, thanks so much for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. As I mentioned, All my teaching videos on the subject of Vedic astrology are my concepts playlist. They can be found there. For more famous birth charts, check out my birth chart archive list 2025 video. For individual birth chart readings, I do offer them. You can email heartlightaster@yahoo.com for more info on that. I do have another YouTube channel on natural medicine where I talk about Ayurveda and yoga, so other Vedic arts. Ayurveda is traditional Indian medicine. And then I talk about other paradigms of natural medicine like homeopathy and naturopathic medicine. And the name of that channel is Nature Source Care, so that's out there for you as well. So as always, thanks so much for stopping by, listening to one of my talks, and all the support you give my work in the channel. Liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing videos, sending in donations, all of it's very much appreciated. So as always, I hope you found this talk helpful, useful, and interesting to you as you learn to navigate the energy cycles of your own life. All right, so until the next one, take good care. Namaste.